Queen Camilla has officially been stripped of every single state, constitutional, and diplomatic duty she had. And the reason why is honestly one of the wilder things I've seen come out of palace circles in a long time. Not because it's loud or scandalous in the way we're used to, but because it's so quietly calculated. A seating chart. A forged memo. Suppressed legal warnings. An assigned confession. The story goes that Camilla tried to have Princess and moved to the second row at the Commonwealth Day service. And that one seating chart decision spiraled into a full institutional crisis that ended with King Charles III signing an emergency sovereign decree to remove all of Camilla's power. If this was just about seating, none of this would have gone this far. But the fact that legal warnings were suppressed, a forged memo was involved, and a senior official confessed under interrogation, that's not palace gossip. That's a structural breach. This is the moment Camilla's world collapsed. After the Commonwealth Day celebration, there was a routine administrative review of operational logs and official documents. That part is normal. Every major royal event gets archived and checked. But during this review, Prince Edward, who was acting as a procedural inspector for the Royal Household Cabinet Office, noticed something that didn't match. The physical seating diagram that was actually used inside Westminster Abbey didn't line up with the master blueprint that had been approved by the Privy Council 3 months earlier. And the difference wasn't minor. The original plan had Princess Anne seated in the front row directly flanking the King and Queen. That makes sense. She's the Princess Royal. She does more engagements than basically anyone else in the family. Her position in that front row is not ceremonial fluff. It reflects her constitutional standing. But on the day of the event, Anne's card had been moved to the second row behind people with far fewer state responsibilities. That kind of change doesn't happen by accident. When Edward checked the core constitutional registry, there was no royal warrant, no official decree, nothing from King Charles III authorizing the change. Under royal law, any modification to national priority seating requires the sovereign's explicit written approval and has to be registered in the official constitutional order book. So right away, something was off. But then it gets stranger. Edward found an intervention memorandum inserted into the master file just 48 hours before the ceremony. The memo claimed to be issued under the King's authority and ordered the protocol team to overhaul the seating layout immediately. Because the document had an administrative seal on it, the staff accepted it and made the change without flagging it. But Edward recognized the flaw almost instantly. King Charles III doesn't issue last-minute changes to constitutional precedents without a formal conference with the Home Secretary and the Great Officer of State. That's not how it works. So the presence of this memo suggested someone had used the King's name without his knowledge. That's not a clerical error. That's a forgery. Edward immediately ordered all Cabinet Office records impounded and secured digital backups from the Royal Document Management servers. Preliminary forensic checks confirmed the memo never came from the King's private desk. The seal on the paper was a standard administrative stamp used for routine household matters, not the sacred seal reserved for royal decrees. Someone thought they could use a routine stamp to override Privy Council seating plans. That's either wildly arrogant or wildly misinformed. Either way, it was never going to hold up under scrutiny. Every document that moves between royal departments is tracked through chain of custody protocols. There are handwritten courier registries and digital tracking systems. So when Edward traced the memo's tracking reference, he found a deliberate effort to bypass standard oversight. The memo went to the protocol division. And senior legal advisors immediately recognized it was illegal. They drafted 2 formal legal warning notices. The first said that altering Princess Anne's seating priority violated the royal prerogative and established statutory provisions under the Commonwealth Act. The second warned that executing any structural change without the King's direct sign manual would compromise the legal legitimacy of the entire state ceremony. Those are serious warnings. But here's the thing. Both of them were intercepted and erased from the official workflow. They never reached King Charles III or Prince William. So someone inside the system actively suppressed legal objections and pushed the forged memo through. When Edward audited the delivery receipts, he pinpointed the exact official who intercepted the legal notices and ordered the protocol team to enforce the memo. That official was Colin, a high-ranking civil servant serving as head of administrative coordination within the office of the Queen. Edward summoned Colin for a formal interrogation. And look, I know the word, interrogation, sounds dramatic, but in this context, it just means a formal audit interview. But the evidence was apparently overwhelming. Copies of the suppressed legal warnings. Courier receipts with Colin's own signature. The forged memo itself. Colin had no defense. Under questioning, he signed a formal deposition admitting the memo had come directly from Queen Camilla's private office under her explicit personal instruction. This is where the motive gets really interesting. According to Colin's confession, Camilla was consumed by insecurity and envy regarding Princess Anne. She was worried that Anne's prominent placement in the front row would draw attention away from her during the first major international showcase of the new reign. So she ordered Colin to construct a memo, apply the administrative seal, and invoke the king's name to force compliance. When legal advisers objected, she told Colin to conceal the warnings and threatened him with dismissal if he exposed the plot. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a coordinated effort to hijack the sovereign's authority for personal vanity, and the fact that it was done to diminish Princess Anne of all people makes it even more baffling. Anne is not someone who seeks the spotlight. She's arguably the most respected working royal. She doesn't court attention. She doesn't compete for headlines. She just does the work. So targeting her suggests Camilla wasn't just insecure. She was threatened by Anne's natural authority in a way that made her act recklessly. Anne's crime? Being too competent. Too respected. Too visible. And that insecurity cost Camilla everything. Edward compiled everything, the forged memo, the suppressed warnings, the chain of custody logs, and Colin's confession, into a master audit dossier. That dossier went to Prince William. And this is where the tone of the story shifts from investigation to consequence. William, as heir to the throne, reviewed the evidence and treated it as an existential threat to the monarchy. Not because of the seating itself, but because of what it represented. If a member of the royal family could use administrative seals to override Privy Council decisions, then the legitimacy of every future decree, treaty, and royal assent could be questioned. If this leaked to Parliament or the press, anti-monarchist movements would have a field day. So William's position was that this couldn't be handled quietly. It required formal institutional discipline. There's a detail in here that I find genuinely fascinating. Princess Charlotte was apparently present during some of these closed-door assessments. William wanted her to observe how complex legal dossiers are dissected and how institutional threats are managed. She's 10 years old. That's a heavy lesson. But it also tells you how seriously William takes the constitutional side of royal life. He's not just preparing for the throne in a ceremonial sense. He's actively involving the next generation in understanding that personal family affection and constitutional duty are not the same thing. That's a very different approach than what we've seen from other members of the family. Once the draft was complete, William requested a private audience with King Charles III. No courtiers, no advisors, just the two of them. He placed the audit dossier and the draft decree on the king's desk and presented the legal analysis without personal bias. He made it clear that Camilla's actions weren't a minor domestic issue that a devoted husband could forgive. They were a structural offense that could shatter public faith in the monarchy if exposed. King Charles III sat in silence as he reviewed the evidence. The realization that his trust had been exploited by the woman he'd spent decades defending hit him hard. But the risk was undeniable. If Parliament demanded an inquiry into the fraudulent manipulation of Privy Council documents, the Crown would be defenseless. William's warning was stark. Enforcing the decree would likely cause an irreparable breach in Charles and Camilla's marriage. But the preservation of the monarchy couldn't be sacrificed for personal emotional comfort. And if the king hesitated, William said he would be forced to take public constitutional measures to safeguard the throne he was destined to inherit. That's a lot of pressure to put on a father and a husband. The confrontation with Camilla took place at Sandringham in a secluded oak-paneled conference room. No press, no staff, no security. Just Charles, William, and Camilla. She walked in expecting a routine family briefing. Instead, she was met with the audit dossier. William slid the documents across the table, one by one. The forged memo. The suppressed legal warnings. Colin's signed confession. Camilla's composure vanished. There was no room to deny it. Colin's statement explicitly identified her as the sole architect of the scheme. She looked to Charles for support, but he averted his face. The trust was gone. Charles spoke in a low, heavy voice. He said her actions had shattered the fundamental trust required of her station. Personal affection belongs to private life, but constitutional authority can never be hijacked for personal pride or jealousy. Then he unscrewed his fountain pen and signed the emergency sovereign decree in front of her. Camilla's only choice was to sign it or face public prosecution. She signed. Her hand was shaking. But she signed. From that moment, Princess Anne assumed full control over the portfolio, administrative duties, and state representation previously assigned to the Queen's office. The decree barred Camilla from Times all state duties, Times official overseas tours, Times major Commonwealth events, Times diplomatic briefings, Times classified state archives. Her public presence was restricted to a narrow selection of non-official personal charities with a strict prohibition against invoking the king's name or royal authority. She was required to vacate the central palaces and reside at Ray Mill House, her private countryside property. The marriage entered a period of permanent icy detachment, and here's the thing about Anne. She didn't treat this as a victory. She treated it as a duty. She approached the transition with total professionalism. She met with Camilla privately to execute the handover. The tone was formal and businesslike. She reviewed every upcoming diplomatic engagement, took inventory of international patronages, and accepted all security keys and classified files. She even used Camilla's own drafted speech at a state reception. Word for word. That decision was deliberate. It signaled loyalty to King Charles III and sent a clear message to the media that this was a seamless administrative adjustment, not a palace coup. And it worked. The press had nothing to latch onto. This story was never really about a seating chart, or a forged memo, or even the legal decree. It was about insecurity. It was about a woman who couldn't stand the idea of someone else being in the front row. Camilla didn't need to do any of this. Princess Anne wasn't a threat to her. Anne doesn't court attention. She doesn't compete for headlines. She just does the work. So the insecurity that drove Camilla to forge a memo and suppress legal warnings was completely self-inflicted. She created a crisis out of nothing because she couldn't handle the idea of Anne sitting in the front row. The monarchy survived. But the cost was a marriage that will never recover. A queen consort living in seclusion. And a 10-year-old princess learning that duty sometimes means destroying personal relationships. That's the real story here. Charles spent decades defending Camilla, fighting for her acceptance, building a life with her. And now that life is functionally over. Not because of public opinion or media pressure, but because she tried to use his authority without his knowledge to settle a personal score. Her insecurity cost her everything. Subscribe to Royal Finance for more royal investigations. Drop your thoughts below. Should Charles have signed the decree? I read every single comment. See you in the next one.